Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, I'll be analysing the latest Bank of England rescue deal with senior research analyst Lukman Otunuga. And I'll be looking at the EU's plans to regulate the platform economy with the CEO of Free Trade Europa, Glenn Hodgson. Then, later, as live Premier League football returned this week, I'll be asking former professional player Michael Potter how the business of football has evolved during the COVID lockdown. Before those discussions, here's our business correspondent Simon Pusey with a breakdown of the biggest business stories trending in Britain this week. Simon, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but on the week that the English Premier League starts, an English Premier League footballer, Marcus Rashford, is dominating headlines. Yeah, this is a really popular story, partly because the government a couple of months ago was saying that it's time for footballers to, do their turn to sort of join the effort, help the cause in terms of maybe donating a bit of money. Actually, what seems to have happened is a footballer seems to have put it back on the government and made them do a U-turn. So this footballer is called Marcus Rashford. He's a very popular player at Manchester United, very young player, age 22. And he comes from a tough upbringing. He's a single mum, one of 5 children. He's black, you can say it, Simon. He heard that the government were going to stop doing their free school meals because obviously a lot of kids aren't at school. It's the summer holidays. He stepped in and said, this isn't right. Obviously, a lot of families are hard up at the moment and a lot of families will depend on those free school meals. So he'd been campaigning for a couple of weeks now, talking about his own circumstances and how he would have gone hungry if he was in that case. The government stood firm for a few weeks, but just recently decided that they were going to do as he'd been campaigning for. So about 1.3 million school children in England will now get at least 6 weeks, the time for the summer holidays, of free school meals. So a lot of people are saying that that's a massive victory for him, and well played him, because he really was a lone voice as a celebrity, as a sportsman, in sort of championing that campaign. So yeah, a lot of people talking about Marcus Rashford at the moment. Can't have you here, Simon, without talking about Brexit. I believe the Prime Minister has spoken to some EU chiefs this week. Yeah, Ursula von der Leyen, high-level talks earlier this week. Both sides saying that they're going to step up talks to try and get this free trade agreement. That's what Britain wants. It looks like it's going to be a tough ask, though. That doesn't seem to have gone anywhere in terms of the EU saying that things really haven't progressed much at all. But Boris Johnson still seems to think that it can be done, and done on time. So remember, he came out about a week ago and said that there's not going to be an extension to that transition period. He thinks it could be done by December or even July, as early as July. So we've seen this before, haven't we? The British government being very positive about stuff, EU slightly less, and it seems to have been the same way here. Mrs. von der Leyen saying that they'd agreed to deliver the best deal for citizens. That obviously means from the EU perspective, they're looking out for the EU. But Boris Johnson saying that he thinks a deal can be done on time. Gosh, I'll hold you to that, Simon. Thank you very much. Another big British news story from this week is the latest update from the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee meeting. And to discuss this, I'm now being joined by Lukman Otunuga, a senior research analyst at FXTM. Lukman Otunuga, as always, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. £100 billion of extra quantitative easing. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for having me here today. Markets were expecting the Bank of England to leave interest rates unchanged at 0.1% and increase their purchase of government bonds by 100 billion. However, I felt there was a sense of disappointment in the markets, and this was reflected in the pound's valuation, which is weakened considerably against the dollar and other G10 currencies. Now, considering how the coronavirus menace has swept through the UK economy like an uncontrollable tornado, I think there was optimism that the central bank will actually increase its purchase of QE by up to 150 to 200 billion. Now, such a move would have further lowered the interest rates on loans and interest rate repayments. That could support consumption, which is an engine of growth for the UK economy. It looks like the Bank of England is keeping its ammunition sparingly and may use more in the second half of 2020 if conditions worsen.
Of course, you say keeping their ammunitions in their back pocket, but I think QE stands at about £750 billion. So they've certainly stimulated the economy quite a bit. And interestingly, their chief economist Andy Haldane, voted against this excess stimulus package. Do you think that this could have something to do with the minutes that were released after the meeting where Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey said in Q2, even though we saw a fall of GDP by 20.4% in the UK, that it may not actually be as bad as some would predict, not just for the UK economy, but the global economy as a whole?
Yeah, surprisingly, we are seeing this sense of optimism, not only in the UK, but in general, that the worst of the coronavirus chaos could be behind us, especially when we're looking at that. We saw it in April, that GDP growth contracted the worst ever seen in record since 1997. And when we look closer at the report, we saw that the dominant services sector, which accounts for 80% of GDP, contracted by almost 20% as non-essential shops were closed. I think it's too early to say the worst is behind us, especially given how, if you look across the globe, there's these cases of rising coronavirus, especially in China, United States. If it comes to the UK, that could essentially throw a proverbial wrench in the works, resulting in renewed lockdowns, something that could hit the services sector and be reflected in Q2 GDP, which the Bank of England has already predicted to contract a shockingly 25%.
A couple of weeks ago, the OECD, they released their forecasts, and they had Britain potentially contracting in GDP by 15.5%, which was the most in any kind of G7 or Western developed nation, just ahead of France, Italy and Spain. Why do you think GDP will contract so much more in the UK than it would anywhere else?
Unlike other G7 common countries, the United Kingdom is facing one key drama, which is called Brexit. On top of that, UK annual wages are expected to tumble a shocking 11.5% in 2020. Unemployment is also set to rise 9%. So we have this horrible combination of, low purchasing power and more people out of work. This would hit consumption, which is the engine of growth for the UK. And back to Brexit, if the UK leaves the European Union with no deal at the end of 2020, this could be a knockout blow that creates extreme instability, and this is something that monetary or fiscal policy may be unable to fix. This is why the UK economy is in a position to suffer the most when we compare to other G7 countries.
Gosh, Lukman Otanuga, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. According to a study carried out by economists at the Analysis Group, the App Store supported $519 billion in commerce last year. In 2020, that figure is likely to dramatically increase, as many of these platform services have seen a surge in demand and usage during the COVID-19 pandemic. Driven by technological innovations and increased online connectivity, the role of digital labour market matching is rising. And as the platform economy evolves, there are both new opportunities as well as new challenges that arise with heightened complexity. Joining me via Skype in Stockholm is Glenn Hodgson, the founder and CEO of Free Trade Europa, a think tank focused on European policy. Glenn Hodgson, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. You've been a pretty busy man on LinkedIn. You've been speaking about the platform economy, and to be honest, I had never heard of it. We've been speaking about the gig economy for a couple of years now. How do the two differ?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, the platform economy is really an umbrella term to be able to cover the buying, selling and sharing of goods and services over the internet. So it's the use of technology and increasing the use of platforms and apps to be able to connect people selling, sharing and buying things together. And at the same time, we have kind of a subset of that is the gig economy, which is the kind of the finding work and very specific kinds of work, which are short-term, temporary, one-off jobs, which have sort of very little social security, no little safety net, which seems to be kind of more of a precarious problem, which we're seeing more and more coming into society, particularly as the economy goes through difficult times at the moment.
Over the past couple of months, of course, people have been so preoccupied with what's going on in their own home, in their own borders, and generally their own health. Why has the platform economy, the gig economy, been an issue that you've decided to talk about and talk about quite vocally?
Yeah, there are real concerns at the moment. I mean, we're seeing with the difference of the labor market at the moment. And we saw this a bit before with the likes of Uber and Airbnb, who came in and maybe didn't sort of respect the rules, didn't respect the regulation, and particularly sort of the treatment of workers and individuals left a little bit too desired. But what we're seeing now with the impact of the coronavirus is that there's more unemployment, there's more difficulties in the economy. So we're almost seeing more people pushed into the gig economy. People who are using it from a choice, they want more flexibility, they want to decide over their own time, but also people who are seeing no other options and a way to get into the labor market and find a job, to pay the rent, to be able to put food on the table, naturally forced into this gig economy, which is more unstable, more difficult, and we're seeing problems associated with it as well. I think over time we're going to see this increase in popularity, people doing it because they want to, but also people who are forced into it, and this needs to look at it from a regulatory perspective as well.
It's interesting you talk about regulations, which is so important because, of course, on the one hand, we celebrate these tech companies. Technology is one of the reasons why I'm able to talk to you from London and you're in Stockholm. But the EU in particular have been concerned, especially with the big unicorn giants who they feel have been able to go into the market, almost be unregulated. We've seen so many stories, haven't we, concerning Facebook and data issues. And I believe that's part of the same story. Kind of these companies, these tech giants feeling as if, you know, they can disrupt the market and take no responsibility for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're seeing now that the development of the services, people see the benefits, and that's good in the startup phase. But now we're seeing that the startups start to mature, they're taking on more roles and responsibilities. They also have to be able to step up to the plate when it means taking stock and behaving like a serious adult in these things, and that means paying the salaries that are needed. It means looking after people's data. It means not just washing the hands of any problems that actually happen. They need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And we're seeing more legislation. There's not just fines, but actually threats to business models that aren't doing things properly. And I think it's about time that we have this. When we get more into the gig economy, I think sort of looking at fair wages, fair treatment of employees, and not hiding behind an app, taking the responsibility to look after individuals. And this is something that's going to come through more and more, particularly as we see an increase in digitalization in society. We're going to have rules, regulations, and responsibilities going to need to catch up as well.
Fair point, nicely surmised. So I've got to ask you before you go, Glenn, I can't believe I'm going to use this word, but wokeness. You know, it's kind of been trending in 2020. Yeah. But as people are becoming more woke, do you think this could potentially prevent these unicorn giants, you know, particularly, you know, companies like Amazon, which apparently Jeff Bezos is going to be the world's first trillionaire. Do you think people will stop, you know, using these services through fear of the way these giants are taking over and the way they're treating workers, especially in COVID? I know Amazon and a few others, you know, were pointed out for not giving enough PPE equipment to their workers. Do you think the people are getting a bit sharp about how some of these technology giants work?
Absolutely. And I think that it's not just a case of having cool services. It's not just a case of having a brand. People are demanding that you have a purpose as well. It's not just a company anymore. It's a lifestyle choice. And I think that it's not just sort of the millennial piece, younger consumers, younger people. I think it's more levels of society and different backgrounds as well. Everyone is demanding that these companies take their responsibility. They need to be able to pay their taxes. They need to look after their workers, and they need to sort of play this role in society. It's not just a case of earning as much money for themselves or the shareholders. It's a case of actually giving back. And companies that don't actually take that seriously, they're going to lose business, and this is going to increase over time. Absolutely.
Well, great cause that you're pushing there. Glenn Hodgson, the CEO of a prominent European think tank, Free Trade Europa. Thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, the English Premier League is back, but not in the way it was post-COVID. After the break, I'll be speaking with ex-footballer Michael Potter about the business of football. See you then. Welcome Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be talking about the resumption of the Premier League with former footballer Michael Potter. But before then, here's some company news for you. The digital fashion retailer Boohoo has beat revenue expectations during lockdown by reporting a 45% jump in quarterly earnings to £367.8 million. The company also confirmed a £5.25 million purchase of the online businesses of Oasis and Warehouse from Hilco Capital. Those brands fell into administration last month with 1,800 redundancies. Boohoo's shares price surged 9.6% higher on the day of the announcement. Shares in the American technology giant Oracle fell by 5% on Tuesday after the company reported fiscal fourth quarter results that missed analysts' revenue estimates. Profits were down 6% from a year ago in the quarter, which ended on May the 31st. For the full fiscal year, Oracle's revenues were $39.1 billion, down 1% year over year and flat in constant currency. Oracle has said the decline is due to their customers who are in industries that have been pummeled by the coronavirus pandemic, putting technology spending on the back burner. UK house builder the Berkeley Group has deferred a planned £455 million payout to shareholders by 2 years due to the uncertainty created by the coronavirus pandemic. Sales fell by half in April and May compared to the year previously. The London and South East focused builder reported a sharp fall in houses sold and turnover dropped by 35% to £1.92 billion. Now, over to our next discussion. Football fans would have been delighted this week as the English Premier League kicked off on Wednesday after more than 100 days of absence. The game, however, will not be the same for a considerable amount of time. During the lockdown, it's been reported that clubs have lost a total of £1 billion. There are no fans allowed in the stadium. A maximum of 300 individuals are allowed in the venue at one time, and players have been the subject of many headlines off the pitch that are likely to dominate for some weeks ahead. For more on this story, I'm now being joined by Michael Potter, a former English Premier League footballer. During his time at Bolton Wanderers as a striker, Potter played 126 games, scoring 53 goals. He now works as a management consultant. Let's start with the biggie. The Premier League has kicked off. I know this is probably a silly question, but I've got to ask it. They've reported that since the lockdown, clubs have lost out on £1 billion of revenue. Will they feel the pinch?
Well, I mean, it's an exciting day today, as you know, Juliana. We're starting with 2 games, but yes, I mean, we've had lockdown here since middle of March. There's been no football being played, and it's been a dreadful time, and not only for COVID-19 here in the UK, but also for, a lot of people love watching football and sport in general. I mean, there's been no sport in general, so the knock-on effect economically has been disastrous, not only for the Premier League clubs, but for also, the lower division clubs as well, who probably, with all due respect, need their income and gate money more than the Premier League teams. So it's been a massive economical challenge for all of the football clubs operating in England at the moment. At the Premier League level, most of the teams, not all of them, but most of the teams have sound financial standings. And most of them have big backers. And they've actually got a solid base of funding in the bank. So I'm sure that they're going to weather the storm, the majority of them. But if you look lower down, maybe at smaller clubs, like, for example, Bournemouth and one or two other clubs down in the echelons of the league, for them it's going to be a big challenge.
I'm interested, and I'm happy, Michael, that you talked about the lower divisions. Our viewers in Nigeria may not be familiar with them, but they do have so many supporters, and they do rely on their fans coming into the stadium. But I want to talk about that because, of course, we know there are going to be no people in the venue. In fact, I believe there are about 300 individuals that will be there from different, I believe, whether they're linesmen or physio, but no fans. And these fans aren't just supporting the players, they're also supporting local businesses, aren't they?
Absolutely. Football gets its income from mainly 3 areas. Match day, from the TV and media, and from sponsorship. So these are the main 3 areas where football football clubs can earn a living. So it's not just all about having bums on seats during the match day. It's also about, making sure you've got the correct sponsors, making sure you've got TV media coverage, and all these are income streams that enable clubs to thrive. But at the lower level, the clubs are really struggling. The Championship, which is the one below the Premier League, even teams in there are really finding it difficult. And as you say, the knock-on effect is, around the ground, there's all sorts of restaurants, shops, pubs. People like to enjoy themselves and they'll come out. Hotels, they'll spend their money. All these suppliers of the football clubs' villages are also suffering because of nobody's around.
Exactly. Nobody's around, and they won't be around for the foreseeable future. Let's talk about the politics of football. And there is politics in football, especially in England, because football is almost seen as a religion here. And during the lockdown, there are no surprises that football has dominated some of the discussion. Got to talk about Black Lives Matter. We've had the likes of Raheem Sterling, who I believe does play for Manchester City. He's been speaking out, and he has been over the years speaking out about racism in football. Then, of course, we had some protests over the weekend, last weekend in London. And even though racists are racist, the far right were called football fans. And then more recently, Marcus Rashford, the Manchester United supporter, urged the government to do a U-turn on feeding hungry children during the summer. Do we always get that? And why is it always that, football and politics do go hand in hand, whether it's for the good or the bad?
Well, football in England is the national game, so it's something that's held very dearly to a lot of people's hearts. And for some reason, unlike other sports, if you look at the rugby union and the cricket as an example here, you don't always get, racism issues within these sports. But yet football, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the culture of the game. But racism is endemic, unfortunately, in football. The English Premier League and the Football Association have got a system called Kick It Out. So, for the last 5 or 6 years, 10 years even, racism has been part of their mandate, kicking out racism. We don't need it in the sport. Sport is sport. Doesn't matter where you're from, what colour you are. It's football. It's a sport, and please enjoy it. But for some reasons, racism has been a big challenge for football, not only in England.
We're running out of time. Gosh, Michael, it goes so quick, this half hour. And before you go, I've got to ask you about a topic that comes in and out of the headlines all the time, just because the wages, I've got to say, are staggering and astonishing. And at the beginning of the lockdown, there are a lot of people that are saying, hang on a minute, football clubs, put them on furlough or stop paying their wages and give it to the NHS. Do you think that story is going to pick up again about footballers' wages and then being paid too much for doing nothing but kicking about a ball?
Well, if I can give you an example, the top players in the English Premier League are earning £200,000 plus a week. At the lower level in the divisions, some players are earning as little as £1,000 to £2,000 a week. So, there's a big economies of scale here. At the moment, players have been taking a cut in wages, which is good. We're talking about the Premier League now. And some of the clubs have actually furloughed their staff, but the bigger clubs have decided not to burden the government with the wages because they have enough money in the bank to be able to support and pay their staff. Will the big money come back? Yes, it will. As soon as things start to get back to normal, and we are expecting that for the start of next season, hopefully the fans will be able to come back into the stadiums. As soon as EPL and football comes back to normal, expect bigger wages, bigger transfers, and everything around it. It's not going to go away. It's a short-term thing. The demands will remain.
Michael Potter, been absolutely amazing talking to you. Got to have you on the channel next time to talk about your career at Bolton Wanderers. But for now, Michael Potter in Manchester, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.